Okay, good morning or hello everybody, because I think there's many people who'll be watching this from various places around the world. It's Louis. My name's Louis Yiakoumi from LConnect, previously from Automotive Logistics. I'm very proud to have another In Conversation, the fourth in the series now. And this time, it's with George Grahovac from Honda North America. So welcome, George. Great to have you with me.
Thank you very much, Louis. And as always, great to talk to you and really honored to have this opportunity.
Thank you very much. So let's start by trying to understand your role. I think I mentioned to you in the preamble that Honda don't have simple job titles. So can you tell us what your current job title is and what that means, what you do?
You know, we really don't. We have rather generic titles. My title, official title, is department manager. I can be considered a senior manager, an AVP in other organizations. Those are kind of subtitles, if you will. We just went through a massive reorganization with the company, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but that was effective April 1st. Prior to April 1st, I was responsible for the parts import export logistics function for North America. I was also responsible for the entire domestic transportation network within the US and certain touch points within Mexico and Canada, as well as strategy and systems for the supply chain effort for Honda North America. All of this is on the OEM side. I do have counterparts on the aftermarket or the service parts side of the business.
Okay, thank you. So from what I've heard from others as well, 2020 was a tough year with the COVID, the pandemic, and the effect that it had on the automotive industry and therefore on automotive logistics. So 2021, we were looking forward to it. So has it been an easy first quarter so far? Has it given you a chance to relax?
No, unfortunately, far from it. I think we all learned much in 2020 about how this new business of dealing with chaotic supply chains more than anybody has ever seen. We've learned from it and we've applied more countermeasures. I say more countermeasures because this isn't our first round of chaos. As we know, we've had tsunamis and earthquakes and fires and floods and always something in the automotive industry. However, this time obviously was a bit more. The good part was that I think through some of the past lessons that really we got ourselves in a position to come roaring back with a lot of open capacity to meet our customers' pent-up demand. During that first fiscal year quarter of last year, April, May, and June, when we weren't making so many vehicles, there was a lot of pent-up demand. And I think that could be said across many industries. So as the economy and as the demand came roaring back, I think that exposed some things that were in the pipeline even prior to the COVID pandemic, the microchip being one. The demand on the microchips have just soared across industries. And quite frankly, the microchip companies didn't affect the necessary capital expense and execute the capacity up plans soon enough. I think they all felt that this pandemic was going to go on a little bit longer than it did in terms of its effect on the market. They weren't really planning for the roarback as we saw in Q2.
Yeah. So what impact do you think 2020 will have on automotive logistics? You've told us about lessons learned. Hopefully we'll keep these lessons in our minds. We tend to forget the bad times and just worry about what's tomorrow. Will we really remember? And what's the most important lesson you think you'll have from 2020?
Again, as I mentioned, I think 2020 was much like some of our previous
Mm,
crises,
mm,
and some of the same lessons can be applied.
mm,
The one that sticks out, the obvious one, is trying to bring more visibility to the supply chain, to the sub-tier 1, sub-tier 2 supply chain. In Honda's case, not much different than other OEMs. We do go into the sub-tier 1 network. We control a certain amount of those components. However, not far enough. The networks are vast and deep, and things like even within raw materials, there's tiered structures within raw materials that we're learning about. And the petrochemical market, I mentioned the COVID, but in Q4, January, February, March, what we were dealing with was the severe and unexpected weather in the southern U.S. that impacted the petrochemical market, which impacted our supply chains in raw materials. And
yeah.
we learned things like there are states of the petrochemicals that are more volatile than others. There's parts of the supply chain that can only travel on barge over a river. They can't travel by truck. They can't travel by plane. However, when the next process is complete and the volatility is stabilized, then we can start shipping by air. And once we learn those type of things, for example, seat foam was a big one we were dealing with. We were able to make foam shipments from China once we understood a little bit more about the volatility of that particular material.
Mm. But I've kind of heard that before, though, in a sense, not from you or from Honda particularly, but every time something happens, every time there's an earthquake, we didn't know before, and now we're beginning to understand the sub tiers. Is this just going to be, another one that the next time something happens, we're just going to say, yeah, we thought we knew, but we didn't?
What we're doing, Louis, is we're really trying to, through this process, we've spent a lot of time talking to our tiered suppliers, and through daily conversations, really, in many cases, and we're learning more and more. One of the biggest things is that we are establishing those necessary networks. We're establishing those necessary communications. There's always communication that goes on between the OEMs and the supply base, but maybe not necessarily these type of conversations and the technical conversations to understand the supply chain and understanding inventory positions within the supply chain. So the first steps are obviously to establish those conversations around the necessary parameters, around the necessary KPIs, where we can start measuring effectively and managing effectively, in particular, inventory positions. I think the next step then is to systematize that, bringing better visibility to those inventory positions, either through reactive ad hoc querying or through a more proactive approach by our tiered structure suppliers. But at the end of the day, we have to understand, one, when there's a problem, two, what the inventory positions are when there is a problem, so that we can quickly analyze the situation, calculate the necessary run out dates, make the production or schedule adjustments that are required, and keep the plants humming.
And your relationship with the purchasing team is close and integrated enough to really share the relevant information and work together?
It is. And I mentioned earlier, I think one of your questions was about our new organization, so I won't wait. I'll jump right in. We did reorganize effective April 1, and it is notably the largest organizational change in Honda's global history. And what we've done is effectively brought many individual companies within the U.S. Canada and Mexico are still separate entities, but within the U.S., we've brought these individual companies under one umbrella. And not only from the manufacturing side, but from the R&D development side as well. So in the past, we were Honda of America Manufacturing and Honda Research and Development of America and Honda Manufacturing of Alabama and Indiana. Those entities are all together now. We're one company, and that is Honda Development and Manufacturing of America. And we're effectively all rolling up under one organizational head that is branched accordingly. And we are under distinct pillars that have commonality that run across all of our facilities. So, for example, transportation management that used to happen within the central region and the southern region separately, although to some degree coordinated, is now all under one pillar. So when we're setting up the transportation network for HDMA for all of the facilities, we're doing that together. When we are developing a new model and we are working to put ourselves in the best position and our suppliers in the best position for that new model, we're doing that together collaboratively. One of the phrases that we've been coining and building into our business plan now is really one way, best way. We want to learn from all the individual methods, and we want to assign the one way, best way to move our business forward. So it's not rocket science. It's standardization of business and policies and procedures. But the other thing that we have done is within this is we have brought a portion of the purchasing function within the supply chain pillar, management pillar. And that is the day-to-day contact that we have with our suppliers from a delivery viewpoint, whether that is daily order releases or forecasting or capacity management or crises management. That is all under the supply chain management pillar right now. So it allows us to be very effective in working with our suppliers from one voice, but also to make sure that we as a company are not impacting our supply base through decisions that are made down the line in the previous supply chain management organization. So we're trying to do what's best for our customers. We're trying to do what's best for our suppliers in making a holistic set of decisions across our supply chain.
Okay, so does that mean that you've got access to maybe more information that you might have had in the past and perhaps influence some decisions based on your needs and requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. Both from a mass production viewpoint or a daily operational viewpoint, as well as a future development viewpoint. Now that R&D and manufacturing is together, and in fact, we're in some cases sitting together, the expectation is that the supply chain voice, along with other voices, are heard, and we are evaluating that development of that new model holistically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And a very important part of all of this is your partners, your service parts, your service providers, your logistics service providers. So, looking at from their perspective, what do you look for in LSPs? What should they do to become LSPs for Honda and for vehicle makers of the future? How should they change? How should they change?
Honda's always had a bit of a different view in terms of our relationships with our parts suppliers as well as our service providers, and that is more of a partnership. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I've been with the company for 32 years right now, but it's really built within our DNA, and it's built within our daily communications and our daily approach towards working with our partners. And as a result, we tend to have much less adversarial relationships and discussions and more collaboration. I think that the next step for us and for everybody, if first step for any other business would be to establish that collaboration. But then once that collaboration exists, what we've been pushing very hard is that our service providers as partners now have a responsibility of being proactive in the approach of solving problems. Don't wait for us. Don't wait for the OEMs to ask for what is needed. You have many other partners in the industry and across industries. So leverage that. Come to us. Tell us what you believe that you can do for us. That's the type of collaborative partnership that we're looking for moving forward. And I just recently, from one of our big 3PL service providers, I recently had a conversation with one of their execs. And he said, George, I love the way that you guys do business with us. It's so collaborative. I said, Mr. X, that's how we always do business. We know no other way. It has to be a partnership. It has to be collaborative. It cannot be adversarial, but it has to be now more than just a service provider in waiting for direction. It has to be a service provider that is coming forth with the direction, the proposals for direction.
And should the direction always be about cost? Is that the biggest thing, or are you looking at, along almost equal? Would it be like, I don't know, technology, how technologically advanced they are? What about sustainability? How important is that when you're measuring your logistics of service providers, or is it purely about cost?
Louis, I truly do believe that everything eventually does roll up to cost and becomes a cost discussion. But unfortunately, too many times it starts with the cost discussion and ends with a cost discussion, as opposed to starting with do the right thing and the cost will follow. I'm a big fan of zero-based, establish the proper processes, tools where necessary, and make a very effective business model, and the cost will follow. So yes, it's all of that. It's not all about just reducing the cost position. Finally, it's about reducing the cost position, but what are the things along the way that are going to make us more effective in our jobs, that will reduce the chance of downtime, that will reduce the burden on our supply base, that will fill our trucks on a regular basis? All of those things will eventually roll into cost, but fixing those each in categorically and systematically fixing those items along the way will ultimately provide the cost position that any company should be looking for.
And how are the decisions made in your organization? Is operations and planning and purchasing all in one group, or is the purchasing part of a different organization? And who makes the kind of final call? Is it the logistics and supply chain team, or is it the purchasing team?
It's a collaborative effort. With our new organization, a traditional, as somebody might understand, a purchasing organization has been somewhat segmented, and functions of that previous purchasing area have been allocated within vertical pillars that make the most sense. And again, at the end of the day, whether it's a cost discussion or a quality discussion or a delivery discussion, if there's commonality running through those three pillars, then there's going to be a discussion to come up with what is the best decision overall. And finally, costs may take a hit for the purpose of delivery or quality. But it is a decision that is made across the pillars as opposed to within a pillar. So we used to say that we're protecting our own area and our own schedules and our own business plans. Now, really, the collaborative effort is across the pillars, and we're working towards a common business plan.
Okay. And obviously, one of the big changes that's happening in the automotive industry now is the electrification of the vehicles. How are you preparing for that? Are you preparing for that? How do you think it will change automotive logistics or your role in the future as you move more and more to electric vehicles?
The components are becoming much more complex. They are requiring more and more of these microchips, for example, and the demands on those are becoming more and more. So again, we go right back to that visibility discussion and understanding within these new components. And it's an excellent opportunity to unfortunately, we never really understood the ICE supply chain, but let's use the new powertrain or the electric powertrain to really deeply dive into the supply chain all the way back to those raw materials and educate ourselves on what goes into these very complex components, least of which obviously is the battery. But I think we're going to continue to learn about requirements for moving these materials. And, our groups are having to become much more savvy, because in the past, if there was a hiccup, well, it's okay. We can just fly these parts to us to make up that difference. Well, now we can't. There are obviously some components that cannot go into an airplane. So we have to be better at what we do and provide earlier notification of issues so that we can react and get those parts and components on a boat as opposed to the air and still meet our requirements. So we're going to learn about that. We're going to learn more about end of life and recycling. And I know there's folks outside of my immediate area that are working on those type of things. But it is requiring us to rethink our business from A to Z. As I mentioned, we're going to utilize this new organization to strengthen and standardize our process and build these new requirements in.
How much time do you, someone in your position, spend planning for the electrification of vehicles, or is it a process that you think a bit like you have to be agile and always changing automotive logistics anyway, or do you kind of say, now I actually need to spend a certain chunk of my time learning, understanding, and growing a team for electric vehicles in Honda?
I think we probably started down that path at one point, but quickly came to the realization that the supply chain is the supply chain. And Honda has been leveraged for some time on various powertrains. We were working on the CNG vehicles and working on that. To this day, we have the joint venture with GM on the fuel cell stack and the FCV, and and the various variations of the hybrid powertrains. So we have been leveraged for some time doing this, and really we're trying to build that common supply chain management platform that, with just a few tweaks, we can manage accordingly. But with that said, some parts of the new technology is forcing us to be better, but it's forcing us to be better across the board, not for a specific model or a specific component within the supply chain management organization.
And what about your logistics service providers? Is it something that's, again, very high in your mind when you're either selecting new ones or working with your existing ones? Do you push them, expect them, demand of them that they have a real understanding of the electric vehicle supply chain and logistics?
Where it makes sense, absolutely. We want our providers to understand those new challenges that come with this emerging technology. But as I mentioned, we're really asking these providers to come forth with solutions as opposed to waiting for direction.
Yeah.
So, we're expecting that if there are requirements and lessons to be learned with this new technology, that they're bringing that to the table, not waiting for us to educate them.
But do you give your providers the opportunity to be proactive? I hear sometimes, from logistics service providers that they feel restricted. Sometimes the RFQs, the tenders are so specific that they can't, move from those. They don't allow the agility. They don't allow them to provide new ideas. And if they do have new ideas, even when they've won the tenders, I said there's no gain share. There's no real value in trying too hard to find something different to innovate because of the, perhaps the lack of flexibility at the vehicle maker, or the unwillingness to share any of the benefits from the improvements.
I think that's an area that we've learned. As I mentioned, I think it's always been part of our DNA. However, I can say honestly and sadly that there have been contracts that I've seen that would not necessarily support that DNA. So we are adjusting contracts where necessary to be more flexible, to more represent how we do business on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual time frame. And so it certainly is an evolving process. Now, one of the areas that you mentioned is very important, is gain sharing. That is an area that we continue to explore. And I had a discussion with a leadership of one of our companies that we have a very strong relationship with. And we were at an annual review, excuse me, and I said, Mr. Y, what is your motivation for helping us to get better? I said, we don't currently have a gain sharing program. And he said, well, it's easy for me. If I don't come forward with solutions and provide solutions for you, Company B is waiting right behind me with those solutions, and he's going to come and bring them to you. Yeah. So he understands that. So the gain sharing, the motivation for bringing forth those solutions, it is an important topic. Again, I think it has to start with the partnership. We need to get out of this business of arbitrary black and white contracts that tie our providers' hands. The contracts need to be written in a way that reflects how we actually do business.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see automotive logistics as an industry changing in the next 5-10 years? I mean, you told me that in one of the pictures behind you, the one on looking at you on your left, on your right, you said you started in that, that's it. You started in that plant in 1989. And say, for example, if you had a son who was born in 1989 and was beginning his journey in the automotive logistics world at a vehicle maker, what kind of skills, what do you think an automotive logistics professional would be like or should be like, to be ready for the next 5 or 10 years? What would you tell your successor? You're still a young guy, but what would you tell your successor? If you want my position in 5 years, 10 years, I suggest you kind of look at this.
I think you have to start as a leader. throughout my career, I've tried to be less of a manager and more of a leader. And even in our name, we haven't quite killed the management nomenclature yet, even within our title of supply chain management. Maybe we're going to change it to SCL in the future, supply chain leadership. But really, it's more about leading and less managing. Mm-hmm. I think we get into this control mindset of controlling our daily operations, such to the point that we really, it's the old adage, so many times we're tripping over a dollar to save a dime. And we really need to be open-minded in terms of the rapidly evolving technology, the rapidly evolving, we'll call it the chaos in the world, but I think it's the new conditions. There are, as you manage from business plan to business plan, you're always managing conditions versus characteristics. Mm-hmm. And I think effectively conditions are going away. It's all becoming characteristic changes that you have to be extremely flexible to manage. So with that said, I think as a leader in this area, you have to understand the business. You have to create a level of flexibility unlike we've seen maybe ever, and build your organization and your processes and systems around that characteristic change flexibility. Giving each individual roles and responsibilities or lines on the road and holding them accountable in those positions, not micromanaging, but moving forward on their own and giving them the lateral ability to work across the organization. So we eliminate these individual silos of, trying to create my own business plan and trying to satisfy my own business plan. No, it's the business plan of the supply chain leadership organization that's moving us forward. The final thing that I'll say is that collaboration across the organizations, across the companies, across OEMs, across service providers, it's happened in the past, but it really needs to happen to a whole new level. Innovation and differentiation between OEMs is not going to happen within supply chain management or supply chain leadership. It's going to happen with the product and the development. And even in those cases, Honda, for example, signed a memorandum of intent to do business with GM for the development of the next fuel cell vehicle. That's public knowledge. That was announced last year. So OEMs are going to do more and more collaboration, even on the product side. So why not on the supply chain side? Let's get together and figure this thing out. We use common transportation networks. We use common supply bases. All of our suppliers are making, in some cases, the same part on the same line. So, we can work together in areas that are going to make us more effective overall, while not compromising individual company differentiation or name brand differentiation.
Now, very good points there. I think, what you've said about leadership, flexibility and collaboration are things for the industry as a whole, but very importantly in the supply chain and logistics industry as well. The final question, which is not one you normally get in an interview, but hey, I might as well ask it anyway, because I think at conferences I used to feel, we built the reputation for having a bit of fun, and I'd say the odd joke, not very good jokes, but a joke nonetheless. So now that I'm in charge, it gives me an opportunity to pass the buck a bit and ask you a question. Have you got a favorite joke or something like that you've always enjoyed?
Well, I don't know about a favorite joke,
Yeah.
but definitely a timely joke. My daughter came to me the other day, and here in the United States, we celebrate. I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but we celebrate April Fools on April
Yeah.
1.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
And it's generally not a big celebration, but
Yeah.
it's a time to prank one another or punk one another. And my daughter said, I'm out. April Fool's is canceled this year. There's nothing else that could happen that could be more strange than what's happened over the last 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't argue with that. My main hope is that I think I've had 2 birthdays now in lockdown, and I'm hoping that they don't actually count. So I'm still back to being 56 years old instead of 58. So it works for me.
Hey, you know what? Age is in our head.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time, George. Very interesting points that you've made. So I really appreciate your time and your thoughts. I'm sure our audience will like them as well. So thank you very much again. And I look forward to speaking with you. And if there's any questions from the audience that come through, I'll feed them to you afterwards. But thank you very much again, George Grahovac from Honda. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.